I want to ask you one simple question. What's stopping you? Now, most of us drive our BMW E46 pretty much every day, but have you fallen into the trap of taking the brakes on your E46 for granted? Do you just assume every time you push the brake pedal that it's going to stop? There are almost 100 individual components in the braking system that have to work together to slow you down and stop you every time you apply the brake pedal on your E46 BMW. It doesn't really matter whether your E46 is stock or whether you've added 20 or 30 horsepower, or maybe you've created a 300 horsepower M3 killer. The fact is, you're relying on all 100 components to work together faultlessly and at their maximum efficiency to ensure that you get home safely. Whether you're simply using your E46 on the weekends as a club car, or maybe you're using it to go to work, drop the kids off at school, or simply going to the 7-Eleven to grab yourself a morning coffee. I want you to stop just for a few minutes and watch this video, because I'm going to show you what's stopping you and explain the maintenance that you should be doing for the braking system on your E46 BMW. So let's get back to the garage and get cracking. For most of us, when we're thinking about the brakes on our E46 BMW, we straight away think of the calipers, rotors, brake pads, and maybe the brake fluid, because they're the items which are most often talked about when discussing maintenance or performance upgrades for your E46. But obviously, there's much more to the braking system than those few components. And it's pretty easy to fall into the trap of out of sight, out of mind when it comes to the braking system, because a lot of those components are tucked away and hidden and not visible every day. Now, some of the braking components are located here underneath the bonnet. In Australia, it's on the driver's side, but it's basically on the right-hand side of the vehicle. So unlike the rotors and the calipers, which you're most likely to see every day, under the bonnet, you're probably only going to get to see maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks when you're checking the oil. Now, there's also a heap of braking components underneath your E46 that need to be checked every now and then. So if you're going to be maintaining the brakes on your E46 yourself rather than taking it to a mechanic to do, you're going to need to get the car up, wheels off, and get down and dirty to find out what's going on. Every time you go to the servo to check the tyres, use the opportunity while you're checking your air pressure to do a visual inspection of the brakes rather than perv on the hot chick that just walked into the servo. But it's a good idea to remove the wheel fairly frequently, maybe once a month or 4 to 6 weeks, to do a proper check of the caliper, the rotors, and the wear in your brake pads. I'm going to get this wheel off and I'll show you what I mean. Now that I've got the rear wheel off, we can get a closer look at the condition of the rotors and the caliper, and a much better look at the condition of the pads through the slot in the top of the caliper. There's a huge range of different brake pads to suit the BMW E46. Stick to a well-known brand to get the best performance and lifespan out of your new brake pads. Next, choose a compound to suit your driving preference: street, performance, or track. Keep in mind, we all have different preferences for brake feel. You may not like the feel of the brake pads that your mate reckons are the best on the market, and that doesn't matter. Next time you replace the brake pads, choose a different compound, and when you find a compound that you like, make a note of it and stick to it. Run your eye over the rotor. Look for any visible signs of damage, any pitting, score marks, and excessive wear. As the rotor starts to wear down, you'll get a bit of a lip at the top, and what you want to do is just run your thumb over it. I would suggest if it's anything more than a couple of mil, then you're probably due for a new set of rotors. Spin the rotor around a little bit, and what you want to do is see that it's running true, that it hasn't started to warp. And the way you'll know that is as you spin it, you'll hear it sort of grab the pad, and off the pad it'll be chick, 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 sort of a noise as it's running through the pads unevenly. So just give it a bit of a spin round. Around the caliper, what you're looking for is any signs of brake fluid leak, and that would be an indication that the seals inside the caliper are starting to break down and they're leaking fluid. And in the top of the caliper there's a slot. Stick your head in, have a look down, and you can do a visual check on how much of the pad you've got left. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, your front pads are going to wear quicker than your rear. It does the majority of the braking, so don't be surprised if you're having to to replace them more frequently, depending how you drive the car, of course. Next thing you want to do is stick your head inside the wheel well. There's a connection at the back of the wheel well where the rubber brake hose connects to the steel brake line. So check around there, get your head right in there and do a good check on the condition of the brake hoses. What we're doing is a visual inspection so that we can schedule any maintenance that needs to be done on the brakes before it becomes a serious problem. Now, if you've got any concerns in relation to a brake fluid leak, then obviously you're going to need to take the caliper off and do a much more in-depth inspection around the caliper and the piston and the seals and that. What I've got in front of me is a brake caliper off your E46, and the reason I've got this off the car to show you is because it's just a bit easier to film. What you want to do when you're checking your caliper is run your eye over it, make sure there's no visible signs of damage or wear, give it a good clean with brake cleaner, which I haven't done as yet. On the inside of the caliper we have the piston here, and then there's a dust seal there. Run your eye over the piston and make sure that it's in pretty good condition. There's no signs of heavy rust, gouges or marks which may damage the seal on the inside of the piston housing. Now, I've pulled one apart to show you the individual components. This is the caliper housing, and see if we can focus in there. I'm just trying to position the camera a bit. So the piston sits in here, and on the inside there you're not going to be able to see it, but there's a lip where there's a seal. This is the brake piston, and as you can see this is in really good condition. There's no marks on it, no scores which are going to damage the seal as it slides in and out. This is the groove here for the dust seal, and you want to make sure that that's in good condition because that's going to stop any debris from getting inside and damaging the internals of the piston. That's the seal which sits inside the groove on the inside of the piston housing. It's your bleed screw. Just there is a small hole which, when you loosen off the bleed screw, that's what allows the brake fluid to come through, so, and then out the top. So if you get dirt and debris in there, it's going to risk plugging up that hole, and when you go to bleed the brakes, if there's any dirt or anything in there, you can actually risk contaminating the fluid. So make sure, where is it, that your little dust cap sits over it like that. Make sure that dust cap's in place. So if you haven't got one, reorder some. These here are the guide pins which secure the caliper to the caliper bracket, and they sit inside these guide bushes, these rubber guide bushes. When you're replacing your brake pads, give these a good clean down with your brake cleaner, and then apply a small dab of silicone paste to it to get them back in, and that'll keep them soft and pliable. And then once you've got all those in, you've got a plastic dust cap which sits over the top of the pin like that, and then you've got an anti-rattle clip. All those components are serviceable. I would suggest though that if you need to replace the piston or the piston seals or the dust seal or anything like that, unless you're really mechanically inclined, get a brake specialist to do it. It's a really fiddly job, and you need to make sure that that seal's put in properly and that the dust seal's put in properly to avoid any risk of brake failure by not installing them properly. The other option is you can buy a refurbished caliper. ECS Tuning used to do them, Pelican Parts, and I think FCP Euro as well. And then the last thing you want to look at is your brake hose. It's a firm rubber hose, but it should still be pliable. Run your eye over it, look for any signs of visible cracking, which is a sign of age. Dirt and debris and things like that are going to affect the quality of the rubber and make it more brittle and less pliable. So good maintenance in terms of keeping everything clean and dirt free are going to prolong the life of your rubber components within your braking system. So that's all the individual components of your brake caliper and how they all get together. I guess the last thing is, the brake pads, but most of us are familiar with that, so I'm not going to bother showing you those. So let's keep going. While you're checking the rear brake pads and calipers, don't forget the emergency brake. The emergency brake is operated by brake shoes which grab the inside of the rear brake rotors. Simply remove the rear brake rotors to check the brake shoes and all the hardware to make sure they're in good working order. If you have to replace the brake shoes, you can buy a kit which includes all the hardware. Before you install it, clean everything down with brake cleaner, install your new brake shoes and hardware, and then adjust accordingly and you're right to go. The brake shoes are operated by a cable, they're not hydraulically operated. The cable feeds in through the back, and then when you pull the handbrake lever up, tightens the cable which pulls these brake shoes out, and then they grab on the inside of the rotor there. So that's the rear brake components. Let's get underneath the car and we'll have a squiz at what's going on underneath there. But first I might just put all this back together, so save me a bit of work down the track. So basically underneath the car there's all the brake lines which run to all four wheels, and this job is going to be made so much easier if you keep underneath the car reasonably clean. You'll be able to see a lot better the condition of the brake lines, look out for any signs of rust and potential damage to the brake lines that could be caused by a large rock or debris that you've run over. And if you're in a climate where you've got a lot of snow and things like that, rust can be a real problem. So you want to make sure that the brake lines are secure, that the brackets are still in good condition and holding them in place so there's not any movement in them and things like that. So let's get the camera moved around and I'll grab a torch and we'll see how we go. Up in there is one of the brackets that secures not just the brake line but the fuel line as well. This is running from the right wheel and it runs across the car underneath, sort of in front of the diff, and that's where it joins up to the bracket on the left hand wheel, and then from there it's going to run along underneath of the car to the front of the car, goes to the side of the fuel tank and up in through there. So that there's the fuel tank, this is the left wheel arch and it's running down through there underneath the fuel tank, and these are the brake lines here. That red bracket there is one of the securing brackets, so if you keep underneath the car clean you can check that those brackets are still secure, they're not rusted out and causing the brake lines to sort of bounce around underneath the car, which is going to cause some damage. These are the brake lines running from the back of the car to the front of the car, so you can see that bracket there is securing it in place. It runs up the left hand side of the car, there's another bracket there, another bracket there, that's the fuel filter. Just in the top corner there you can see the clutch lines, then it runs up the side of the left hand front wheel arch up into the engine bay. So let's get up underneath and into the engine bay and we'll follow everything back from there and show you what we've got underneath the bonnet. When topping up or bleeding the brake fluid on your E46, refer to the owner's manual for the correct specification brake fluid. Avoid removing the filler cap to check the level of the brake fluid. Instead, use the high and low indicator marks on the outside of the brake fluid reservoir. Now the reason for this is every time you remove that filler cap, you're going to introduce a small amount of air and moisture into the brake system, and that means you're going to have to bleed and flush the brake fluid more frequently. So underneath the bonnet is where you find pretty much your control center for your braking system. You've got your brake booster at the back, your fluid reservoir, and the high and low marks are down this side of the bottle, so that's where you check to make sure that your fluid's okay, and there's your cap on the top to top up the fluid if required. You've got sensors for your brake fluid levels, there's a connection at the back here, heap of electrical wires, which is controlling your ABS and your traction control. Check that all that wiring's in good condition and is not about to fail, that the connections are nice and tight. Check around where the steel brake lines go into your manifold, make sure there's no signs of leaking there or any brake fluid around any of the components underneath here. So if you keep this nice and clean, it's really easy to then spot a leak as soon as it happens. So pretty straightforward underneath the bonnet, but just checking for leaks, that the wiring's in good condition, that the hoses and the steel lines are in good nick, and you're right to go. Who doesn't like a big brake kit? They're friggin' awesome, right? Absolutely love this big brake kit from StockTech. 330mm rotor, 4-piston calipers. I've opted for the drilled set and the 2-piece rotor. Absolutely awesome. Comes with stainless steel brake lines for added brake performance. Yeah, great kit. Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed my video about maintenance for the brakes on your BMW E46. If you've liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button. And if you'd like to share any of your maintenance tips with any of our other viewers, don't forget to leave us a comment below. If you want to see more BMW E46 content about performance upgrades, maintenance, or to follow the build of my E46 BMW, how about you subscribe and tickle the bell so you get notified each time I upload a new video. If you want to see more maintenance tips about your E46 BMW, then I'd strongly recommend you watch this video here. Or if you want to watch the video that YouTube thinks you're going to enjoy the most, you can watch this video here. I've really enjoyed your company. Thank you very much for watching. But until we meet again, look after yourselves, stay safe, and TTFN.